Story 1. For context, I'm missing the majority of my fingers due to a congenital defect, and it was my first month working as a bartender when I had this conversation with a very drunk lady. Me at the bar pouring drinks. Lady, hey, I have a question I can't stop thinking about. Me, sure, go ahead. Lady, are you a lesbian? Me, nope. Lady, thank God, because you don't have fingers. I've never laughed so hard in my life, and my coworker was in tears too. It's been nearly 5 years, and I still think about this. The best part was that this happened only around 1 p.m. Gotta love bottomless brunch. Story 2. I was managing an upscale Italian restaurant in a fancy San Francisco neighborhood during the COVID pandemic. I walked outside to our patio and noticed a patron reaching over the divide, trying to hand something to the couple sitting in the next booth. I quickly approached and observed that this man's pants were down at his knees, and the man in the next booth was yelling that he was trying to hand them drugs. So, I found myself telling this pantsless man, "Let's put on our pants and keep our drugs to ourselves," which was a sentence I never thought I would utter. The COVID pandemic was truly a wild time. Story 3. We had a guy who was known for being a frequent vomiter. One night at last call, he quickly drank a beer so he could order another. However, immediately after drinking it, he vomited it back into the pint glass. Being intoxicated, he wanted another one and redrank his vomit and beer. The vomiter was a friend of a friend. He and my friend were in the same fraternity, and he shared a story of his legendary vomiting. One night, while playing a drinking game, he finished one of his beers and had to vomit. Instead of vomiting on the floor, he brought the empty bottle to his mouth and vomited back into it. He claimed he didn't spill a drop. Story 4. Found out that all the liquor was bootlegged and dumped into bottles with brand names. Nobody restocked except for the boss. Story 5. I worked as a doorman at a bar at the university while attending. Our football team was hosting an arch-rival one weekend, and a few of the opposing players were in the bar wearing team jerseys. One of the waitresses came up to me and said, "That big guy in the jersey is eating glass." I figured I must have misheard, but she repeated, "He's eating beer glasses." I went over to the table and sure enough, this guy was breaking off chunks of glass from the rim, apparently chewing them and swallowing them. To this day, I don't know if it was some kind of magic trick, but it sure looked real to me. The guy was huge, probably 4 inches taller than me and twice my weight. I told him politely, "You have to stop damaging our property or I'll have to ask you to leave. If you don't, I'll have to call campus security, and they will report this to your coach." I was very relieved when he agreed to behave with no further escalation, as I would have had my butt kicked. I really wish I knew how he did that, though. Story 6. It has been a few years since I bartended, but we had to kick a guy out once. He returned half an hour later and punched through the glass door. He severely injured his hand and wrist and ended up waiting on the curb for both the police and an ambulance to arrive. A 24-hour emergency glass repair company replaced the window by the time we closed. Story 7. I don't necessarily think it was outrageous, but one time I served a couple where the man was a little person and the woman was of average height. I asked what they wanted to drink, and the man requested a tall Crown and Coke, while the woman asked for a short cranberry vodka. It seemed to be their first outing together, as they looked at each other and burst out laughing over their obvious size preference. It made me chuckle too. Story 8. My mom was a bartender, and she has shared a few stories from her time in that job. One time, she went to break up a fight between 2 biker groups and ended up getting thrown, resulting in her leg getting caught in a ceiling fan. She broke her leg but managed to stop the fight. Another time, someone she knew laced her drink with LSD while she was working. Before Queen became super famous, they played a show at her bar. After the show, they asked if they could throw an after-party, which included just Queen, about 50 people, her, and another bartender. Someone from the band may have had a brief encounter with my mother, and I'm not even upset about it. She said they were really nice guys who just wanted to have a good time, not a crazy party. Story 9. Not working in a bar, but a friend and I were camping in France. We were exploring the local area and walked into a bar, ordering a cola each since it was midday. The bartender seemed a little off. There were two other bartenders standing at the end of the bar, along with what looked like a couple of waitresses. We found it odd since it was a tiny pub that had only use for a single bartender. Our drinks were poured in the wrong type of glass, no ice was added, and they were laboriously filled to the brim. The two waitresses were wiping down already clean tables. In fact, one table was clumsily wiped down 3 times as we stood there. The other two bartenders had started wiping the insides of glasses with the wrong type of cloth. These people did not belong in a bar. They had no experience whatsoever. The bartender handed us our drinks, and when we went to pay, he struggled with the cash register. After a few moments, we were informed that there was a problem and that the drinks were free. That was the only spoken interaction from any of the staff at that time. We took our drinks into the garden and discussed the strange vibe in the pub. There were no other customers, yet 5 staff members for a small pub with around 15 tables. After a while, I went back inside to inquire about nearby hotels, but there was nobody there. I called out but heard nothing in response, so I went to use the bathroom. When I opened the door, I saw a large pile of clothes on the floor. Next to it, leaning against the wall, was a military-looking assault weapon. I quickly turned around to leave and walked briskly out of the pub. As I exited to go into the garden, I was stopped by 2 of the bartenders who insisted I sit down inside for free drinks. I also saw that my friend was being led inside. At this point, I was really unsure what to do, so I sat down. My friend sat beside me, and the other staff appeared, starting to jabber in what sounded like a Slavic language. Eventually, they all exited into another room, and we were told to wait. We didn't wait. We left and ran up the road, hiding in some bushes. A few minutes later, 2 cars drove slowly by, one driven by one of the bartenders and the other by someone else. They were clearly looking for someone. We think it was us. When they had driven past, we ran across some fields and took a bus back to our campsite. Once there, we saw one of the cars and the bartender arrive at the reception. He appeared to show a badge and began asking questions to the receptionist. We never took our tent or sleeping bags, just our backpacks, and went cross-country until we found a train station, where we boarded a train to Nice. That was back in 1981. My friend died several years ago, but we talked at length about what had happened and could never really explain it. Story 10. An elderly man is caught in a fight between a 75-year-old and a 60-year-old, who has a foot injury, as well as the same 75-year-old choking an 80-year-old in a cartoonish manner. Story 11. I worked at a local pub for 6 months, but that experience still stands out in my mind over a decade later. 2 different bachelorette parties arrived around the same time to pregame before heading to the clubs, and both brides exchanged snide comments. To separate them, I offered one group complimentary access to the normally paid pool table in one corner and set up the other group with a dartboard in the opposite corner. I thought I had successfully distracted them. However, I was mistaken. I encouraged both groups to order pitchers of mixed drinks and directed them toward lighter alcohol by volume beverages, hoping they wouldn't get too drunk and rowdy before leaving for the clubs, as I recognized trouble brewing. My fellow bartender Melissa noticed 2 groups of women with plenty of cash to spend and began serving them several rounds of mixed shooters, mainly around 40% alcohol by volume or above 30% at the tamest. I wasn't informed of this until after the chaos unfolded. I was deep frying hot wings for a regular when I heard a commotion erupt and dashed out of the kitchen. My distraction had failed, and both parties decided the best way to improve their night was to scream at each other over silly high school drama that even the youngest should have outgrown. Almost simultaneously, they decided that if shouting wouldn't win the day, then violence would. Bridal Party A had the advantage with their pool cues, while Bridal Party B had the ranged advantage with their darts, despite having limited ammunition. The seating area quickly transformed into a chaotic battlefield of hair pulling and clothes tearing, while a pragmatic member of Group A used her pool cue as a spear, jabbing someone from Group B hard enough that she vomited about $30 worth of shots. Meanwhile, the most valuable player on Group B's side was hanging back, armed with a handful of darts, and actively throwing them into the melee whenever she saw an opening. While most of her throws missed, her few hits were equally likely to strike friends as foes. At least she was smart enough that, When it all stopped, she bore no visible bruises, cuts, clothing damage, or even beverages splashed on her. The fiercest part of the skirmish was between the two brides, grappling and fighting as if their lives depended on it instead of it being a trivial bar fight between two groups who had a silly rivalry years ago. At one point, they were both choking each other, seemingly in silent agreement that the first to back down was the loser. Their duel was interrupted when Brida tricked over a woman from Group B, causing them both to lose their grip and crash to the ground. Melissa and I crouched behind the bar like it was a foxhole, joined by Steve as his wings burned in the fryer. He gripped his beer like it was a lifeline. Melissa had already called for emergency services. So we stayed hunkered down while I pondered the mess we'd have to clean up once things settled down. When the police arrived, both sides froze in place. To keep it brief, after a fairly uneventful conclusion, both parties were taken to the police station. I'm unsure of the charges, but I know each received at least 2 or 3. I provided the police with a copy of the security footage, but the quality was so poor that even after multiple viewings, it was impossible to determine who initiated the conflict. After we gave our statements and the police left, I locked the door but told Steve to take a seat. I made him a fresh batch of wings, poured him a beer, and comped his bill. He had that wide-eyed look of someone who'd witnessed something no one should endure, so I let him enjoy his wings while Melissa and I cleaned up after the brawl. I brought out the carpet cleaner to address the vomit from the pool cue victim and wondered aloud how she managed to sneak in that many shots when Melissa admitted she had served both parties several rounds of shooters. While Melissa handled the cleanup, I secured the kitchen, bar, and cash register so we could lock up and leave, pretending the day had been nothing more than a bad fever dream. I unlocked the front door, and Steve walked away with a full stomach and a distant expression. Melissa and I parted ways, having just experienced the largest brawl we'd seen. It was notable mainly due to its scale and the participants' gender. Most shifts from Thursday to Saturday night, it was common to see a quick fight between a few men with too much bravado and few inhibitions. But those were usually brief and contained, allowing us to clean up and resume service in under 15 minutes with hardly any disruption. Story 12. I worked at the Hard Rock Hotel in San Diego, where I was part of a security team that managed 2 clubs. We had a weekend-only team for the bars, a holding cell, and a few team members were emergency medical technicians. We also had a wheelchair covered for practicality. When young women enter social settings, they often dress in their finest outfits, wearing high heels and skipping meals to look their best. Throughout the night, they consume alcohol, leading some to become excessively intoxicated. This can result in them needing to use the restroom urgently, and unfortunately, a few may have accidents in the process. To clarify, it's not just women affected. However, the ratio of intoxicated individuals was almost 100-to-1 in favor of women. This disparity largely prompted us to employ female security staff, who could assist in managing these situations with care before escorting those in distress to our office for further help. Story 13. During the early 2000s, at a cattlemen's convention held at a resort, a 6 feet 6 inches, 300-pound cowboy had been drinking for several hours. He knocked over a table and a waitress, then staggered up to the bar asking for more pitchers of beer. I cut him off and tried to offer him something else, soda, juice, or coffee. The cowboy became irate, with his friends encouraging him. I explained that I could lose my liquor license as well as the bars. He grabbed me by the throat and pulled me over the bar, yelling, "I don't need some punk telling me how much I can or can't drink." It was reminiscent of a scene from a cartoon. Security intervened, and it took 6 of them to subdue him. The manager approached to find out what happened, and I informed him of the situation. He yelled at me, saying, "They're here for a convention. If they don't spend money here, they'll just go somewhere else." At that point, I was ready to quit. I had a mark from his handprint around my throat for 3 days, and I never saw them again. I also witnessed an older, struggling bartender almost get involved with a clearly flamboyant individual after our shift. Story 14. A respected former NBA player drugged one of our servers who had just finished work. He took her drink and poured it down the drain. Story 15. I am debating between cleaning an old man's urine off a bar stool during service multiple times and using a makeshift Corona bottle shiv. Story 16. I had a man in a wheelchair roll up behind me while I was sitting at a bar, and he began weakly punching me in the back and side of my abdomen, as if he were trying to start a fight with a stranger. I turned around and laughed out of shock, and the bartender witnessed it and wheeled the man out of the bar, locking him out. Looking back on it, it's somewhat sad because he was clearly either drunk or depressed and wanting someone to confront him strongly. I'm glad it was me and not someone without self-control he chose to attack. Story 17. I'm not a bartender, but the bar I frequent recently showed me a video of a customer who apparently exposed himself to another patron. That patron then started throwing punches. My bartender tackled the flasher. The flasher went home with the police. Since there was no audio to the security footage, I imagine things went something like this. Bro, check this out. Exposes himself. Other bro, why are you showing me that? Throws punches. Story 18. I had a guy stalk me after the bar closed while wearing a ski mask. One woman smashed a beer bottle over another woman's face. One man smeared mess all over the toilet on my birthday while I was bartending. I could share stories from my 10 years of working in a small-town bar all night. Story 19. Courtney Love and Winona Ryder appeared to be out of their minds, likely due to alcohol and pills. Love repeatedly tried to hold my hand and ask if I recognized her. It was both sad and unsettling. Story 20. I have witnessed people getting into fights, observed a tornado move parallel to our building just a few blocks away, seen drug deals in the parking lot, and watched my manager kick out a man for insulting a nearby table of women and attempting to confront them. I was approached by a woman entering the men's restroom, openly inviting me to follow her, which the entire bar overheard. A drunk woman told me I was condemning my family to eternal damnation for not wanting to marry her daughter, whom I had never met before. I noticed couples clearly using remote vibrators together and had to clean up a significant mess in the men's restroom. I also watched a couple break up, followed by the man getting a beer dumped on him by a random woman shortly after he tried to flirt with her. I could continue detailing these experiences. Story 21. Not while bartending, but while working at an ice cream shop. This office worker used to buy 2 empanadas from the supermarket next to us and a large ice cream from us. She ate everything in one sitting as if it were her last meal on earth. She did not lick the ice cream like many of us do. She took bites. Then, 2 minutes later, she would lock herself in the bathroom and vomit it all. When she got out, the whole store smelled terrible. I know she's struggling with bulimia, and this is not her fault, but I had to address it. I told her that I would appreciate it if she stopped since I was the one who had to clean this every day. She did. I hope she is doing better now. Thank you for the award. It's my first one. I knew staying up until 5 a.m. would bring me something good. Story 22. Bar trivia host here. Can I play too? I had a guy, about 6 feet 3 inches tall with a blonde military flat top, charge my table because the category for the final round was acronyms, and the correct answer to the question was technically an initialism. He was banging on my table with his fists, losing his mind, but one of the bartenders noticed he had a 9mm handgun on his hip. This is where it's important to point out that this was a libertarian brewery in New Hampshire. Every bartender, waitress, and busboy in the place, including the owner, was also armed and drew on this guy, encouraging him to leave. So anyway, it's only an acronym if you pronounce it like a word, NASA, and it's an initialism if you just say the letters, FBI. Story 23. I worked at a pub in London around 2004. This pub was known as the birthplace of drum and bass music, although that claim was often disputed. Every Friday and Saturday night, there would be a team of about 10 bouncers, and they were absolutely necessary. One night, about 20 intoxicated young men were denied entry, and a mass brawl broke out between them and the bouncers. I was working behind the bar. After the brawl ended, with the bouncers maintaining their unbeaten record, one of the bouncers casually walked over to the bar, slowly sat down, and calmly said in a thick Jamaican accent, "Give me a brandy. I've just been stabbed." We called an ambulance, and he waited for it, sipping his brandy as if we were making a fuss over nothing. It was only when the paramedics arrived that he opened the front of his jacket to reveal a 6-inch knife buried 5.5 inches deep in his chest. The paramedics, who had seemed quite calm until then, sprang into frantic action. I remember the bouncer being carried out on a stretcher, still wearing a completely bemused and calm expression. Story 24. A fight broke out between two intoxicated individuals outside my bar. The smaller guy ran back inside while I was collecting empty glasses, shouting that someone had a gun. I foolishly stood in front of a glass door to lock it, facing the man approaching with a gun. A girl at the bar, whom I was flirting with, shouted at me, "What are you doing?" In that moment, I realized what was happening and jumped out of the way. Story 25. A dive bar in Brighton had a group of lads ordering a shot of Leah and Perrins or Tabasco with every round. They made their skint friend take the shot before he could have a pint, which was nothing too crazy. I kicked them out when they produced a pint of urine and placed it on the table for their friend to drink. It was far from the worst thing I witnessed, but it served as a healthy barometer to judge friends by. Story 26. I worked in a nightclub with a capacity of 1,000 that hosted a gay night on Thursdays, mostly attended by men. One night, I had to physically break up two men having sex in a small room that housed a garbage compactor. The room was always dirty and smelled bad. Over 20 years later, I still have regular flashbacks. Story 27. I have been out of the business for many years, but back in my day, the wildest thing I ever saw was two girls engaging in a compromising position in the middle of the dance floor. This occurred in a busy nightclub on a Friday night. I have seen a lot, but that was the most outrageous moment I can recall. Story 28. Bachelor Party. One of the entertainers had a disturbing and impressive party trick involving ping-pong balls. I stopped booking bachelor parties after that experience. Story 29. I saw a girl who was menstruating literally stand up, take off her pad, sit down, and bleed into the chair, leaving a trail on the floor. We had to close a 24-hour bar for 2 days for hazardous materials cleaning, as I work in a Las Vegas casino. Story 30. A well-known person on the Strip confessed to me that he had hidden cocaine. He was acting erratically. He was banned by everyone 2 years later. I have no idea how he survived all this time. Story 31. I worked at an outdoor bar at the beach. The local crowd enjoyed live music most nights, and the dance floor made it a fun spot. One night, a woman in her mid-30s, who was out with coworkers, had been consuming tequila shots. When a favorite song played, she exclaimed, "Oh, I love this song," and got up to dance. Feeling emboldened, she attempted a backflip, but unfortunately landed on her head and began screaming in agony. We had to call an ambulance, but as far as I know, she ended up being fine. The part one remember most was one of her friends comforting her on the ground, saying, "You're okay. You always nail the backflip. You must have slipped." Story 32. I saw one of our regular customers who often criticized same-sex marriage pick up a transgender woman a few times. He tipped very generously. Story 33. I'm not a bartender, but I lived in an apartment building near a downtown area with many bars and clubs. One night around 4:30 a.m., I was in bed in my studio apartment when I heard footsteps crunching on the pebbles outside my window. This was not unusual, as many shift workers live there and my apartment was next to the laundry room, so people frequently came and went at odd hours. However, instead of the footsteps moving toward the laundry room, they went around the corner of the building. The next thing I knew, the handle on my back door was rattling back and forth, and someone was trying to pull it open. I was overcome with fear and could barely keep my hands steady while I called emergency services from my cell phone. The noise stopped before the police arrived, which felt like it took an hour. An officer took down the little information I had and said they couldn't find anyone on the property but would check around the neighborhood. On Monday afternoon, I was just getting home from work when I ran into a neighbor at the mailboxes. I mentioned what had happened the previous morning. She revealed that the same incident had occurred at her place as well, except she had seen the person before calling for help. She was a bartender. And the man who had been trying doors around our building was a drunk customer who had followed her home after the bar closed. The police found him a block away from the building, and when they arrested him, he had a knife. Story 34. I was assaulted by a street gang in a bar in the 1990s, which escalated into a brawl involving approximately 25 people over the course of about 2 hours. By the end of the night, most of the staff had left and quit. The incident was so poorly handled that the city closed the bar. Story 35. I was punched and pepper sprayed in the face at the front entrance lobby of my restaurant in Seattle 7 hours ago, while a man was initially attacking an Uber driver who had just arrived to pick up a takeout order. Yes, children and older people were affected as well. The police took 2 hours to arrive. I have been in the industry for over 15 years. Story 36. I worked at a German brewery near a college, not as a bartender but as a busser. Naturally, I had to clean up a lot of messes, and I have a few stories. One guy tried running outside while holding his mouth tightly, but he ended up spraying vomit all over the front entrance hallway, on the floor, walls, and ceiling. The unexpected twist was that it was spaghetti, and the German restaurant didn't even serve spaghetti. At night, the place was pretty dark, and seating was not assigned after a certain time. A coworker informed me that there was vomit on a table, so I went to clean it. A new group of people was sitting there drinking, and they looked at me strangely with all my cleaning supplies. When they looked down at the table in horror and saw the mess, they started screaming. This restaurant also had an outdoor bar at a lower level. I was cleaning glasses on a sunny day under an awning when I suddenly heard what sounded like heavy rain followed by screams. Someone on the upper level had vomited on the awning, and it was dripping down on the customers below. That was an interesting cleanup. Bonus story. I was using the restroom when a guy sprinted in and vomited all over the floor. His dad followed him in, berating him heavily, saying, "I haven't thrown up in a bar since '87, you wimp. No son of mine is going to be sick after a couple of drinks." In the end, the guy tipped me $20 to clean up his son's mess while still lecturing him near a comatose state. Story 37. We had a guy who, at one point after too many ciders, gave us a look that said he was about to have an accident. He jumped off the stool and ran to the restroom. A few minutes later, he sheepishly walked out and made a sharp exit toward the door. Staff have to check the restrooms regularly to maintain hygiene, so I went in. It smelled terrible, like something had died in there, and my eyes started to water. I approached the stall and found a mess everywhere. Walls, seat, and floor were covered. I looked around and even saw some on the windowsill. I called for help to clean it up, but my curiosity got the better of me and I went outside. There I saw it. A pair of boxers soaked in mess, slowly sliding down the wall, leaving a trail. The guy had literally lost control and made quite a scene before he ran away. Story 38. A very pregnant woman took a shot of tequila and left. I didn't notice her pregnant belly until she stood up to leave. Story 39. We had an automated teller machine installed at a bar where I worked. On the very first night it was in service, as we were ushering people out, I noticed a man standing a little too close to the machine. This man was so intoxicated he thought he was at a urinal. To make matters worse, a security guard ran over and grabbed him mid-urination, splashing anyone and everyone in his way. Story 40. I used to relax at a local Kelsey's where some friends worked at the bar. There was this obnoxious guy on an electric scooter who would get completely drunk all the time, and random items would go missing. One day, he reached over the counter and tried stealing 4 bar glasses right in front of me and the bartender. He then attempted to deny it, even though the glasses were in his basket and jacket pocket. A few weeks later, when I was working, he came into our store, stood up from his scooter, and sat on an item while pretending to shop around like he hadn't taken anything. After reviewing the footage, it was clear that he was a kleptomaniac. Story 41. I was not bartending, but I was off the clock while my girlfriend was working. At 2 a.m., I was sitting in my bar stool when a female customer said she would be thrilled if she got cheese curds. I quickly grabbed the curds, but one of her friends didn't like that and followed me into the kitchen to confront me. We had a brief altercation, and he ended up with a busted lip and a severe fryer oil burn. I think he got off easy, all things considered. Remember, nothing good happens at 2 a.m. Story 42. We were understaffed one night, and the bar owner was pouring drinks when he suddenly took out paper towels and told me to go outside to the outdoor dining area. There was a massive fight involving about 7 to 8 people. 2 men were knocked out, and 3 more were bleeding everywhere. I still don't know what it was about. Story 43. A man pours his freshly served beer into a shoe and then throws it away before putting the loafer back on his foot. He is still really confused about that. Story 44. I work at a dive bar. Last year, during the hockey playoffs, I really wanted to be home, so I wasn't into being there. I had 2 patrons, one wearing a raccoon skin cap. The man in the cap was trying to tell me something funny. At the end of his story, he started to laugh, which turned into a nasty cough, and I swear he coughed out a tooth. He held his tooth in his hand, with a little spittle dripping from his bottom lip. We looked at each other. I chuckled and shook my head, thinking, geez, man. And then I went to the other patron. Story 45. I have a lot of stories. I'm not sure this is the most outrageous, but it's my favorite. 2 random drunk customers thought they could sneak into our utility room to have a quick encounter and got stuck under our extension ladder. It took multiple security guards to extricate them safely. Once they were removed, the girl tried to run and hide. When we found her and kicked her out, she pretended she didn't know the guy she had been with, who had waited out front for her. Story 46. I was working at a hotel bar when a woman asked if she could pray for me. Caught me off guard, but I said sure, I could use all the help I could get. She proceeded to share some highlights about her life. She was a minister and married to her high school sweetheart. Later, as I saw her leaving, an Australian caught her interest with his accent. "Let me buy you a pint," he said. She replied, "I really shouldn't, but I guess I can have one." 45 minutes and 3 beers later, she was making out with him at the bar like a high schooler at the drive-in. I can't say I wasn't a little disappointed given all the stories about marriage and religion. Story 47. I got bitten on but through my skirt by a drunk patron while working as a waitress at a local live music venue near my college. The bouncer threw him out. The bite broke the skin, so I was worried about infection. It also made me drop my tray of drinks. Story 48. Years ago, I worked as a bartender in a well-known family restaurant when a table of 3 was seated just minutes before closing. I proceeded to take their orders to get the ball rolling, and a lady at the table ordered from the kids' menu. Annoyed, I informed her that she could not order from the kids' menu at the bar, but I would be more than happy to relocate them to the main dining room. She threw a tantrum, so I told the manager I was going to ignore the rule to get these people out faster. I went back to take the lady's order, and she said she wanted a kid's hamburger with everything on it. I asked her what specifically she wanted, as the kid's hamburger comes plain. She smugly insisted on everything that comes on the burger, obviously. At this point, I was starting to get calmly argumentative because, first, this lady had already admitted she was just trying to be cheap. Why order from the regular menu when the kids' menu is half the price? Second, she had been incredibly rude the entire time. Her husband tried to intervene, but that only made things worse. She started screaming and cursing at him so loudly that the entire restaurant, including the kitchen, fell silent. After a few minutes of this, she went outside. I apologized, and the husband was very understanding, saying it wasn't my fault. Shortly after, he went outside to try to talk to her. Minutes later, while I was cleaning the bar, I noticed headlights moving out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see her driving her truck in circles, trying to run him over in the parking lot. We called the police, but she drove off before they arrived. They spoke to the husband and their guest, as well as the manager that night, but never came in to ask me anything, and I never heard anything else about it. Story 49. My mom was a bartender in the 1980s, around the time when Jägermeister started marketing towards younger college-age demographics. One night, the bar was running specials, and the Jaeger was flowing while everyone was having a great time. Eventually, 4 a.m. rolled around. My mom called last call and cleared out the stragglers. While cleaning, she noticed one gentleman was still in the bar. This man was fast asleep, passed out, snoring but standing upright. She eventually got the drunk man up and out of the bar. I'm a bit foggy on the details of what happened afterward, but a year later, they got married, and another year after that, I made my grand entrance into this world. Story 50. I worked as a barback for a friend's bar. The most outrageous thing was that one of our customers over 65 would know it was time to go home when he had an accident. Every day, at the same time, in the same chair, the same incident occurred. Story 51. Story 1. While working in restaurants, I don't have many guest stories that are unusual. The most surprising events tend to involve the managers and other staff. One incident that comes to mind occurred during the summer when we hired a group of college students. One of them, whom we will refer to as Izzy, was a 19-year-old college student, possibly Latina or Italian. I only worked with her for about 3 shifts. Our general manager liked to do what my friends and I called employee purges, which is when managers fire several employees within a short time to address lax behavior among staff. This tactic had varying effects, but my friends and I managed to survive every purge. I no longer work there, but I believe this practice is common in many places. From what I observed, Izzy seemed to be doing well, but when I returned after 2 days off, I found out she had been fired. Apparently, she left a table unattended or forgot about them, but I don't know all the details. While I understand this is a serious issue, I question if it warranted her dismissal. Later that night, her father came in, reportedly upset because she claimed she wasn't paid. According to my managers, this led to a scene. Story 2. This story recounts a review. I wasn't working that night, which seems to be a recurring trend. A couple sat at the bar, where we usually had 2 bartenders and a barback on Thursday through Sunday, along with about 5 to 8 servers. We didn't employ bussers at this location since it was pooled, and despite being a high-volume environment, many preferred to work harder for a more substantial payoff. As a former busser, I hold a different perspective. On that night, one bartender was a 5 feet 9 inches brunette around 20 or 21, and the other was a 6 feet 8 inches muscular black man. Let's call them Christina and Mike. The review was largely negative, mentioning the service. One line stood out, paraphrasing, "The blonde was very inattentive. We waited 30 minutes, and the black bartender had to assist us." While I may be exaggerating the tone slightly, I know Christina was handling the service bar, which means she managed drink orders from tables. Sometimes, she wouldn't be able to serve guests immediately, and Mike wasn't particularly attentive to new arrivals. I understand that no one is perfect, and it is unfortunate they felt underserved. Nevertheless, I don't believe it's unreasonable for them to express their dissatisfaction. Story 52. Not bartending, but it was my first night as a manager in a place where I used to bartend. Towards the end of a party, as we gradually turned on more lights, the DJ played slower songs and the dance floor became less crowded. We noticed 2 guys engaged in inappropriate behavior right among the other dancing people. Story 53. In a nightclub in the late 2000s, I was working the door during happy hour before I opened my bar for the night. We had 12 bars, so we all did this to meet customers better. A disruptive couple came in with what we assumed was their friend. They had clearly pre-gamed and were being sloppy, getting into minor arguments as they moved from bar to bar, but we just dealt with it. After a few hours of causing issues, the 2 men started a fistfight outside the bathroom, and the girlfriend yelled for security to break it up. I watched from a distance, but as they were being dragged away, the woman collapsed in front of my bar and started bleeding from her nose and ears. She completely stopped breathing. It turned out the other guy had drugged her while trying to set up a threesome that the boyfriend didn't want, and he severely overdosed her. I performed CPR through a plastic bag for about 10 minutes due to concerns about disease transmission before emergency medical technicians arrived. They all left, and we thought it was just a crazy night. Then the boyfriend showed back up to pay his tab, which he didn't have, looking for her. Get this. He said she shot awake from the defibrillator, jumped out of the ambulance, and ran away. He then picked a fight with a barback, got beaten up, and was thrown back onto the sidewalk. Later, we learned the other guy was arrested for pulling a knife on the boyfriend in front of the police and on camera, all while the nightclub atmosphere continued around midnight. It was wild. Story 54. When I was in Alberta, a man tried to pay for his drinks in US dollars. We explained that we do not accept US dollars, and he started a massive fight. This led to his arrest and to him trying to plead the fifth in a Canadian court. Next, he could not understand why Queen Elizabeth II did not show up to court and could not comprehend how she could press charges against him. As far as I know, he was deported and can never enter Canada again. Story 55. I work at a lovely cocktail bar, and we had a private event. At the end of the night, we found a lobster in one of the urinals. Keep in mind that we don't serve food, only small snacks, so no one had any idea how it got in there. Story 56. My married boss in his 60s was making out halfway through a Friday night shift with a 23-year-old part-time bartender who was supposed to be managing her side of the bar. It was outrageous for several reasons. First, he was married and the age difference was significant. I was 19 at the time, so I found it particularly disturbing. Second, they were doing it right there at the bar. And third, we were extremely busy because we were hosting an event. At that point, things were devolving into chaos, and that was the day I quit. Story 57. I am not a bartender or an adult, as I am 13 years old, but I once heard a story about someone urinating in a shot cup while drunk. The woman who used the cup threw it at the person who peed in it. It is the craziest story I have ever heard. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.